Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. I don't think we'll be able to top March for excitement on the Michigan athletic scene, but we have red-hot baseball and softball to watch, and this Saturday it's spring football under the lights. It would be nice if the weatherman would help us out. It has been a dreadful start to April as far as baseball and softball are concerned, and for the spring game it looks like rain and cool weather. Hopefully not as much rain as we experienced during that Michigan State fiasco in October, but it sounds like you'll have to bundle up and bring the rain gear if you're heading to the big house. If you're staying home, the game can be seen on BTN Saturday night. My guest this week on our Game Day segment is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports, here with our monthly recruiting update. It's a long segment today, and there is a lot to talk about. First, a few news and notes to get us started. There were multiple stories on Monday stating that Ole Miss objected to Shea Patterson's waiver request when they responded to the NCAA in March. According to reports, Ole Miss responded at the deadline set by the NCAA. What that means for Shea Patterson and Michigan is unknown. We still have no idea when the NCAA will render a final decision. Patterson has been taking part in spring practice and is scheduled to play in Saturday night's game. Wolverine tackle Grant Newsome hasn't been cleared to participate in spring practice or play for the 2018 season. Newsome is currently a player coach with Michigan. Newsome continues his rehabilitation more than 18 months after he sustained a dislocated right knee in October 2016 against Wisconsin. ESPN's Football Power Index predicted every Big Ten team's 2018 final record, and it forecast the Wolverines at 9-3. Specifically, it projects that Michigan will lose to Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Michigan State this season. One facet of college football doesn't have an offseason, and this is, of course, recruiting. Sure, there are dead periods and the new early signing period, but in reality, in this modern era of college football, if you're not recruiting every day, you're asking for trouble and you're falling behind. The class of 2019 is off to a pretty good start. As usual, Jim Harbaugh and staff have spread the net far and wide from coast to coast, but it's also going to be a good year right here at home. Up next is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports with our monthly update here on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Back with us on our Game Day segment this week for our April recruiting update and more. Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. Great to have you back, Steve.
Thanks, Mike. Always a pleasure.
Well, Steve, we're up to 7 hard commits in the class of 2019. I can't remember when we talked in March if it was 5 at that time, but it is 7 now. Last week we picked up a 3-star defensive end, Gabe Newberg from Clayton, Ohio, and I have to admit, that name was new to me. Your thoughts on him?
He did pop up. You know, Michigan's recruiting board, I always say it's kind of like an amoeba. It just like shifts and moves around all the time. It's always that's one of the hardest things about this staff is trying to figure out, you know, I think one week a guy will be a top target, a guy thereafter, the next week they'll be hardly recruiting him. So, you know, it's very touch and go, I guess, the way they go about it. Newberg's big thing is he had a really strong connection with linebackers coach Al Washington. Washington, when at Cincinnati, was the first offer of Newberg for Newberg of the recruiting process. So there was a definitely connection there. You have to assume, obviously, Washington probably pitched him a little bit to the staff. I think one really big plus, again, you know, maybe fans don't want to hear this. I always look at a defensive end out of Ohio who has a Michigan State offer, and I think this guy can probably play football. I know Bill Green, our national guy, he's based out of Ohio, actually kind of compared him to Chase Winovich a little bit as far as that unrelenting motor, you know, effort guy, you know, and I don't know, sometimes those intangibles are kind of chuckled at a little bit, but no, I mean, I think he's got that in his film, but he's a little bit longer than Chase is, and is a guy that could take that want to be one of the guys at that weak side spot eventually, I feel like. So, you know, they're going to take quite a few defensive linemen this cycle. We know Chris Hinton remains solid. Herron, it's still kind of up in the air, I feel like. So, they needed another guy. They're not done at that position either. But Newberg, I think, is he's a huge Michigan fan too. When that offer came in, it was pretty much a done deal, provided Michigan would accept his verbal, which obviously they did. So it was pretty much a done deal at that point. So I think, you get a few of those guys every cycle who would maybe run through a brick wall to play for Michigan, with the added bonus that he does look like a guy who could become a player. I know we say this about a lot of the when they're not like a 4-star, or I think he's like an 85 or an 86, but I'm really interested to see where his ranking goes going forward. I know his first grade was primarily based off a game. One of our analysts was out there in a game that basically turned into like a mud bowl, so difficult, when they try to make an in-person grade in that situation. I like his film, and like I said, this is the kind of guy I feel like Michigan State would have turned into a player. They have such a long track record at that position in turning these types of guys into players, and obviously, Madison Brown more than capable of doing so with him. So nice pickup. Like I said, you want a guy that wants to be there more than anything. And like I said, Iowa, Michigan State both offer. I mean, those are both programs that I think some staffs take notice when schools like that offer a guy.
Well, I'm not sure if Caden McNamara had committed when we did the March update, so let's get your take on him again and why Michigan went after him so hard.
Yeah, that one was not a surprise necessarily. I think it was a surprise when we never even, I don't think anybody had caught wind that he was even on campus, actually. He decommitted from Notre Dame. He's out of Reno, Nevada. Alabama, USC, Michigan were kind of the three schools mentioned most. I don't necessarily believe anybody expected him to almost immediately. I mean, it was a couple weeks after he decommitted from Notre Dame that he's on, with Michigan now. I like him. I think he's a high floor, moderately high ceiling guy. He just had a pretty good performance at the Adidas 7-on-7 national championships yesterday. He can get out of the pocket, make some plays. Really nice start. He's another guy too. I think will rise as the rankings continue. I'm sure he'll probably be in contention to compete at the opening in Dallas this summer. And again, you beat Alabama, USC especially. I mean, Alabama's just had the great grandson of Bear Bryant actually just committed to Alabama to play quarterback. Michigan was recruiting him too, but USC wanted him. Notre Dame obviously wanted him. So you beat two blue bloods like that for a 4-star quarterback. You're going to take it any day of the week. So the question now is, will they take two? We talked about that all of last cycle, that they wanted to take two. My instinct, the way that it ended up playing out with them basically, in my opinion, cooling on Kevin Doyle at the very end, I think it was more a product of, you remember Joe Milton had enrolled by the time the second signing day had come around. I think they were so impressed with what they'd seen out of Milton that they felt comfortable maybe going with just him in 18 and then maybe shifting to 19 for two, because I think at some point they have to take two scholarship guys at quarterback. They're still recruiting guys, as they always do, but I think this is the cycle where I think they're going to attempt to take two. It's always easier said than done. These guys that they're still recruiting, Graham Mertz, Wisconsin commitment. Wisconsin's not recruiting a second quarterback. So if you're him, wouldn't you rather maybe just kind of be the guy at Wisconsin? So that's kind of where you recruit to. It's just difficult. You want to make sure you take the right guy first, who's willing to be in a part of the two-man class, and then you got to kind of go from there. So, yeah, McNamara, though, real nice addition to the class. I like him as a quarterback here. They've done a really great job recruiting the quarterback spot. So, I posted this last week on the site, said it a few times, but I think starting this year, I think last year was the worst that you'll ever see the quarterback position played at Michigan under Harbaugh. So, future's really bright there. They keep adding. Well,
if we do add a second quarterback this year to the or next year to the class of 2019, the one kid I read about, and we talked about him before, is 3-star Sam Johnson. from Walled Lake Western, and I know he was well aware that Cade McNamara was coming. He said the coaching staff had discussed that with him, and he said he's not afraid of competition, so he is still very warm on Michigan, isn't he?
Yeah, I'm interested to see where that one goes. I know Alan Trieu, another one of our national analysts, recently switched his crystal ball to Boston College. I think Johnson would be a really good second quarterback in the class. I think he is a higher upside guy who, again, I think sort of in the mold of Newberg, a kid out of Walled Lake, I think would have dreamed of playing for Michigan as a kid. I think he remains a possibility. It's just their board shifts so often. It's just interesting to me to see where they end up going. I know a couple of the guys they were recruiting, I don't believe they are anymore. I feel like they've kind of cut it down a little bit. And Johnson was just on campus last week, I believe, along with his teammate Spencer Brown, who's still verbally committed to Michigan State. So I could see Sam being the second guy. I think that'd be a nice fit with McNamara there. McNamara more of the 6'1", pure dual threat guy. Johnson reminds me more of I think he's more of the classic pro style between the two for sure. Johnson can definitely get out and make plays with his feet, but sort of like Milton, where I think maybe labeled as a dual threat when he's more of a pro style. I mean, Joe Milton is a pro style guy all the way. So, I think Sam's definitely still a possibility there. I know my crystal ball is still on Michigan for now. It's just I want to see how things play out here for a little bit. I assume the quarterback position's funky. A lot of these kids always commit early. And, so I assume probably within the next month or so, we'll have a really good idea of maybe where quarterback's going to go from here.
Well, Steve, as far as running backs in this class, we've talked about Michigan going hard after 5-star Quavaris Crouch from Charlotte and 4-star John Emery Jr. from Destrehan, Louisiana. How are we doing with those two kids?
Probably about the same. I do know Crouch for sure is expected to be on campus sometime this spring or summer. No concrete date there that I'm aware of, but I do know Michigan is fully expecting him back. With Emery, it's kind of it's getting into the mix now. He's starting to take some other visits. I know Michigan was prepared for a battle there. I think he's been to Auburn. I think Auburn's a real factor. He was just at Georgia this weekend. A kid out of Louisiana. Again, we've talked about that before, about it's just not as easy to recruit as it was when they were getting Chris Howard and Anthony Thomas and, those guys back then. So the landscape of recruiting has maybe changed a little bit in that regard. So he's going to be a battle, but I do know, I think Michigan, I would probably put Michigan in the top 3 for Emery for sure. He is not a lock to LSU at all. Destrehan's actually a program where, it's kind of weird in these states. Like, I look at Ohio, the Cincinnati area is not as, they're not as big a lock to Ohio State as they are in Cleveland or other areas of the state. Destrehan's kind of that spot in Louisiana, a program that churns out D1 talent like literally every single year. I think they've had like a 4-star guy for the last 6-7 years. Some of them go to LSU, but not all of them though. Unlike New Orleans, where most of those programs it's LSU or nothing. So he's definitely open to going somewhere else. It's just a matter of can Michigan kind of be that school? Again, they've done a really, really good job recruiting him. It's just it's going to be tough, and there's just no way around it.
Well, another 2 kids that you have listed over 24/7 is warm for Michigan. One is all-purpose back Wandale Robinson. He's a 3-star from Frankfort, Kentucky. And Daniel Carter. He's a 4-star from a great program we're familiar with, St. Thomas Aquinas, down in Fort Lauderdale, one of the best programs in the country. Any chance either of these kids will commit, or even soon?
Not sure about a commitment. Robinson was just on campus 3 weeks ago. That's when they offered him. Actually, primary recruiter is Jim McElwain. Interesting to see, what he'll do on the recruiting trail. I know he's been helping Michigan out with some guys in Florida and in the SEC area already. Robinson's a guy. There's a couple guys they offer. There's a Kyron Johnson out of St. Louis too, kind of similar all-purpose guys who are. I don't know if you turn on Robinson's film. I mean, he is a blazer. I mean, he's one of the fastest players that Michigan's recruited that I can remember. And that's his draw, is his pure speed. So His offer sheet is solid so far, but not national. I wonder if he's a guy Michigan can maybe wait on a little bit and see where things go. But I do know that they're really intrigued by his speed. Kind of a guy that they could get the ball into his hands a lot of different ways. I want to say they even mentioned just brought special teams up to him too, as a potential special teams guy, as a returner, which you don't actually really ever hear that very often, to be honest with you. When I heard that, I thought that's kind of one of the first times I ever heard them actually pitch, like, hey, you could return punts for us. They don't really talk about it that often. So that was interesting. But a Blazer with Carter, kind of interesting. Carter is, like, if I remember right, it's half and half, being recruited as a running back by some schools and as an outside linebacker by other schools. I think Miami, I want to say, has done a pretty good job there. Not sure with Michigan. If I would guess that Michigan probably prefers him at outside linebacker. I know he's listed as a running back. Our system on 24/7 is kind of funky. We try to switch the positions, and it doesn't work sometimes. As a running back, I think maybe some interest, but I think there are plenty of other guys they've offered that are a little bit higher on the board. The other, like I mentioned, Kyron Williams out of St. Louis, Breece Hall out of Wichita, Kansas. He's actually teammates with Marcus Hicks, a big defensive end target, is a guy that they just offered. They also really like. So a couple other guys there to look for. But, yeah, I'd say Robinson of those two. Robinson's the guy they're definitely more interested in right now.
As far as wide receivers, you have 4 listed as warm at 24/7. Micah Pittman, 4-star from Calabasas, California. Kyle Ford, I think we've talked about Kyle before. He's a 4-star out of Orange, California. David Bells from Indianapolis. Asia Turner, another California kid out of Carlsbad. How many receivers do you think we're going to take in this class?
I was just thinking about that this morning. There was some discussion about numbers on our board, and I think 2. I'm guessing because again, this isn't going to be a big class. I think it's going to be a little bit bigger than people think, but it's not going to be what 16 or 17 was. I would say I would look at 2 maybe as the baseline number right now. They only took the 1 last cycle with Ronnie Bell, and we know the story with Ronnie Bell as a guy that I think has some development still ahead of him. I think he's really intriguing. I don't think he got a fair shake from most fans if you actually watch his film and if you watch his basketball film. As a super athlete, I think it's going to be really interesting. But I do think, they have the 4 and 17 that really the reports so far this spring are positive on all 4 of those guys in Collins and obviously Black, Peoples-Jones, and then Oliver Martin too. So they're getting production there, but I think, you got to take at least 2. Kyle Ford, I think the story's kind of the same. He's a big baseball player, so I don't think he'll be coming back out this way until his baseball season's over. Micah Pittman, kind of your typical national prospect. I think he's going to be a really difficult pull. I would probably watch Florida there. Obviously, though, USC always, it's just always seems to end up that way. David Bell's interesting. I think David Bell's a guy Michigan I'd have felt good about for Michigan a couple months ago. He's actually a really good basketball player too, legitimately good basketball player. And there's some programs that are starting to pitch a 2-sport type thing, including Purdue, which if you're Purdue, that's what I would do, because that's kind of what you have to do sometimes to, compete nationally with some of these schools, is to kind of think of a unique pitch, and is he good enough to play at Purdue basketball? I think some think he is actually, maybe a bench guy or whatever, but, that's a really enticing pitch to play both sports. I know Michigan State did it a few times back in the day with, was it Matt Trannon is the one I always think of, but, some other guys where, that opportunity to give both sports a chance is really enticing. So I know Purdue, Ohio State, obviously still involved there, and then Michigan too, but that one's not going to be as easy as maybe it could have been a month or 2 ago. Turner, a little less familiar on him. I do know Michigan was a pretty big offer for him. I want to say Oregon is a program that's been mentioned with him quite a bit. I'm interested to see if any of these Cali kids come out for the officials this spring, because I think that's kind of what Michigan would want. The early official visit period is a new thing this year. Interested to see, I think it's a big advantage for Michigan because normally a kid like, just say Pittman, for example, a kid that I wouldn't have given Michigan much of a shot with, if they say they can get him for an official this spring, it gives them a taste of what Michigan's like, instead of having to wait until October, November, when they've been to USC like 8 times or been to UCLA like 6 times. You know what I mean? Though it's like, these kids play in these big cities where the big city school's right there, and you're paying on your own dime normally if you want to go see a Michigan or an Ohio State. If you're in California, if you want to go out there, you have to pay your own way. But now you can that can all be taken care of, in the spring. And then it gives Michigan a good idea. Is like, hey, is this really a kid that we're going to have a shot with? Instead of wasting 4 or 5 more months recruiting him and then hosting him in October to find out, I don't really think this kid's that interested in Michigan, or the visit didn't go spectacular. At least you can get that out of the way in April or May now, and know, maybe where things stand better, and then you can build off of that visit and go from there. So, those Cali guys, they're actually John Dunmore out of I want to say Hollywood Chaminade, one of the best receivers in the country. He'll take an official visit this weekend to Michigan for the spring game. He's a name to watch. I think it's Florida State. Same deal though, right? I mean, he's been to both of those programs like 4 times already. And so, Michigan can get him up in April. And then I think that's a great litmus test for how these early officials will help Michigan, because I think they'll know right away, like, yeah, I think we got a shot here. Let's keep pushing. Or, nah, he's probably going to stay closer to home. Let's work some other guys instead. So, wide receiver is going to be interesting. Kyle Ford and Bell have been kind of the 2 names I think talked most about. They've put some recent offers out there. I think they offered Frank Ladson out of Florida, who's one of the best receivers in the cycle for sure, maybe the best in my opinion. And I want to say they offered, was it George? Can't remember the kid's last name. He's from Auburn, Alabama. Says he'll take an official to Michigan at some point, and that's another McElwain. So they've expanded their board a little bit in recent weeks. But again, I think kind of a wide open position in my opinion. Ford's a guy they'll have a real shot with, though. His family's big Michigan fans, which doesn't always mean anything, but it doesn't hurt for a kid that's from way out there. So, we'll have to see.
Well, in March, we talked about tight ends. We're after Luke Deal was the kid we talked about from Greenwood, South Carolina. The other one that's popped up on the board that I don't think I had noticed him before was Isaiah Foskey, 4-star from a great program, De La Salle in Concord, California. Have we offered him? Yeah,
Isaiah was offered an eternity ago. Actually, I want to say he may have been their first tight end offer of that cycle. Interesting recruitment, actually. He was actually just sort of out this way. He saw Georgia, Clemson, Penn State, Ohio State, but didn't come up to Michigan. I actually have a pretty good rapport with him because he was the first tight end offered. He said he's coming back up to the Midwest at some point because Michigan, Notre Dame were the 2 schools he wanted to see that they just didn't have time for, which, I mean, then you're like, okay, well, so you had time for those other 4, must mean that you may have a little bit more interest in those programs, right? Michigan has a really good relationship with the staff up at De La Salle, and, De La Salle tight ends are always going to be a hot commodity, in my opinion, from Michigan because, Devin Asiasi, as far as De La Salle, plays like a tight end heavy offense that throws their tight end. Like their players come out at tight end, they come out of high school really well-rounded, like more well-rounded than most high school programs at the position. So I think that's one of the reasons they offered Foskey so early. I think they offered him after one of the satellite camps up in Northern California. I think it was the same one that Najee Harris was at, actually. That's the same camp that Michigan offered him at. So he's been on the board for a while. He seems kind of wide open. Again, we'll just have to see if he follows through and makes those visits. I know Clemson really impressed him, but Clemson's also the favorite for Luke Deal, and I believe Clemson already has a verbal commitment at tight end, so I don't know how they would work that out. I can't imagine them taking 3, but I know Clemson, of those 4 visits, I got the impression from him, because I actually talked to him, got the impression that Clemson was probably the best of those 4 visits for him. So still a name to watch. Again, tight end. The thing about tight end, it's a late bloomer type position too. There's always a few like legit guys that come on in the senior year. You know, you might have like a undersized offensive lineman that might get some snaps at tight end, or just you go back, you look every year, Michigan's always kind of found a late target at the position. So interested to see how the board develops. But yeah, Luke Deal will be up for the spring game this weekend. Pretty big visit for them. As I do, I think he's probably the top of their board right now. I do think it's him and Foskey still, but I think Deal's probably number one.
Steve, we're recruiting a really good group of offensive tackles, 4 of which you guys at 24/7 have listed as very warm for Michigan, or warm. Let me just run these names down and give me an idea who you think is really leaning towards us. Trevor Keegan from Crystal Lake, Illinois. Then there's William Harrod, who we've talked about, from Fort Washington, Maryland. Barnhart from Paw Paw, Michigan. And Jackson Stewart from New Canaan, Connecticut.
So I think top 3 for Keegan for sure. I'm interested to know when he comes back up. We haven't gotten any confirmation on that. I'd say Ohio State, Wisconsin, probably the other 2 in that top 3. Harrod, again, I'd be I think something would have to happen for him to not eventually end up at Michigan. I know Oklahoma, Oregon are trying, but I think he's a heavy Michigan lean. Barnhart, Michigan's done an excellent job of getting back in that. I mean, Michigan State offered earlier, recruited him earlier, but Michigan offered. They've worked pretty hard there. I see him, we talked about this on our board last week, I see him as a potential center prospect in this class for them. I think they'd like to take a center if possible, and I think he's the top guy there. And then Stewart, Stewart's a new name. A lot of debate on the board about that one, of course, because he's a 3-star. It just blows people's minds that Michigan won't go only after 4-star prospects. But he's starting to find a national profile. I know Texas A&M just offered. Trying to think, a couple other bigger programs offered. A&M's kind of the one I remembered, though. Definitely a project, but that's what these guys get paid a lot of money for. They see things in these guys' films that we'll never see, and go from there. It's a visit. He was on campus 4 or 5 days ago, and they offered on the visit, which is when they offer on a visit, it's always a good indication, like, hey, they were definitely interested. They just wanted to see the kid in person, either get to know him better or just actually see them physically, and go from there. So I think the fact they followed through with the offer, given what else they're recruiting up front, I think is a really good indication that they're pretty high on him. So again, I have to see what happens. I believe he's going to be visiting A&M officially at some point. Hard for me to wrap my head around a kid from Connecticut going to Texas A&M, but if it's the best opportunity, that obviously it's a great school. So, but I kind of get the impression maybe Michigan here, if Michigan decides to push. But I mean, they're still recruiting so many guys up front. I mean, you have John Olmstead, 4-star out of New Jersey, was just on campus the other day. They're still slowly trying with Logan Brown out of East Kentwood, the 4-star Wisconsin commitment. They're still slowly trying with Devontae Dobbs out of Belleville. Like, I don't think either of those are dead yet by any means. Matter of fact, I think somebody on our board posted like himself in a Michigan jersey last week, which those little things like get people all riled up. So, but they're still trying there. But there's so many possibilities of how that's going to end up front. I like what they've done so far. And again, most of these guys that they're in on are guys like Xavier Truss. I know we've talked about him. I think he'll be on campus in the next couple of weeks. The kid out of Rhode Island. Penn State leads there, but I think he hasn't been to Michigan yet. That's Kwity Paye's high school teammate. So I think they'll do well when he comes up. So just tons of possibilities still. They need tackles. Trent Jones, the verbal commit, was just on campus again. I think that was huge to get him back up. I mean, he's had some major schools sniffing around Clemson, Oklahoma, I want to say, a couple other, like Texas A&M again, I think is another program there that's working him. I think they got a steal with him. I think he's a easy 4-star prospect, probably underranked in my opinion. So tons of possibilities on the offensive line. It's just they got to finish. That's kind of been the theme the last few cycles. They've done well. They haven't done as bad as I think fans perceive that they have up on the offensive line recruiting wise. It's just they've missed on guys late, and that's kind of what people remember. like last cycle, I thought they did, with Filiaga, Ruiz, Honigford had 30 offers. Stuber was a guy that camped twice. It's like they knew what they were getting with him. So they've done well, but, people only remember the Isaiah Wilsons and the Nicholas Petit Freres and the Devery Hamilton flipping to Stanford at the last second, but they do. I think they need to finish on a few of these. And I think the change in staff, without going too into it, I think will eventually be a benefit. They have some really aggressive recruiters that are involved in these recruitments. So,
with us on our spring update or April update here on our game day segment this week is Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. And Steve, as far as defensive tackles go, we've talked about Maisie Smith from East Kentwood, Michigan, still a big Michigan target. But there are two other names who are warm on Michigan. I don't think we've discussed them. Rodis Johnson, he's from St. Francis de Sales down in Columbus, and Ismail Sopsher from Louisiana. Maybe we did talk about him last time, but your thoughts on those two kids, Steve?
Yeah, so Smith, far and away the number one target. I think Michigan's in good shape there. Sopsher, was he from Amity, Louisiana? We'll see. I think he's a guy that could get up for an official. And then you can only kind of go from there. I think they've believed it's SEC. He'll probably be a classic, like LSU, Alabama recruiting battle type thing. So, and then with Rodis Johnson, that one I'm not sure about right now. I've been trying to kind of dig on that one a little bit. Michigan's defensive tackle board's pretty interesting. I think the one thing to remember and to watch is Chris Hinton, who's already committed. He's a big dude. I kind of get the sense that he may slide inside once he gets to college, at least maybe to that anchor position, maybe like the Wormley style or a three-tack type spot. So because they haven't really expanded their defensive tackle board at all. They made those couple. I think Rodis Johnson's the last guy they offered, actually. They're not recruiting Juwan Briggs out of Cincinnati. A couple other guys they've offered, I can't think of the top of my head, but really it's kind of been a small board there. But I think that's partially because they feel so good about Smith and that Hinton could slide inside, because you get to the outside on the ends, as I'm sure we're about to, they're recruiting a ton of guys on the outside. So that's why I kind of feel like Hinton's future may be inside.
Well, as you just mentioned, the defensive ends, we already have three commits there. Hinton, Heron from Louisville, and Gabe Newberg from Clayton, Ohio. Who else are we going after, and how many defensive ends do you think we are contemplating?
I mean, that's kind of become the $1 million question this cycle for me. Heron, like I said, we'll see what happens there. I think there's a real chance that he maybe ends up somewhere else. Again, that's not a guarantee. He may be up for the spring game this weekend. If they get him up, that'd be, I think, welcome, obviously, and great. Maybe Michigan can get things back on a totally solid ground. But, there's just more names I can think of. George Karlaftis, currently committed to Purdue, is a guy. I was wrong on that one. When he committed to Purdue, I assumed that meant that Michigan was not going to take him, because I felt like Michigan led for a while there. But no, Michigan would have taken him then, and they would still take him now. He actually just visited last week, and then Michigan offered his younger brother. His younger brother is a 2021 prospect. He's 6'3", 225 linebacker. Like these, I don't know where these kids come from. How that's like an NFL linebacker size already, and he's only a freshman in high school. So, good for him. And then Adisa Isaac out of Brooklyn, New York. I think he is a guy who is going to fly up the rankings. He's already a low 4-star. He just had a great showing at the opening in New Jersey yesterday. I think Michigan, Penn State probably are the two teams. He's another guy, just got on campus. He visited for 3 days. I think Michigan, that he reminds me, he's a Don Brown. Like, granted, he's a guy like that is an anybody, but he just kind of strikes me as the kind of guy that Brown really, really covets. Aeneas DeCosmo out of Bergen Catholic in New Jersey is a guy. That's what my crystal ball is currently on Michigan. The only reason I'm a little shaky on it is just because they're in on so many of these guys. Mike Morris, 4-star Florida State commitment, was on campus. last month. Which seems really intrigued with what Michigan has to offer. I mean, he's visited Tennessee. He's visiting somebody else, but I know he's just on Tennessee's campus, Miami, and then brought up Michigan kind of provoked by our Tennessee reporter. Just left me a message last night saying that he had brought up Michigan kind of unprovoked there. So Michigan's on his mind. I'm trying to think of who else is up there. There's more than I can even think of right now. Michael Fletcher, 4-star out of Flint. I mean, he's a take for sure. One of the higher ceilings in the entire cycle. I mean, he's got Georgia, Alabama, Wisconsin are all recruiting him. 6'6", 240, arms that are down to, I mean, he's got some of the longest arms that I can remember, which at defensive end is exactly what you want. So, he's definitely a big time target. So yeah, I mean, all those guys, like I said, there's, you put everything together. I say Michigan's recruiting board is like an amoeba. And then I just list like 7 defensive ends that Michigan has a legitimate chance at. It makes it really difficult to kind of parse through, like I say, I put a crystal ball in for DeCosmo after that visit because I'm told that Michigan would accept a verbal commitment from him, and 2 weeks later, they've hosted 4 of the 5 names I just listed on campus, so it's like they're not going to take 8 defensive ends, so it's like, that's always kind of the interesting part is, learning, or parsing through, like, who's the guy that they'd go through with, who's the guy they wouldn't. Fletcher, for sure, though, is a guy they definitely would. And I think Karlaftis, too. With the other guys, I couldn't say 100% for sure. I'd have to assume Isaac as well. But, again, like I said, you look at Hinton maybe sliding inside, Heron not being 100% committed right now. That technically may leave you with, we'll say, 1.5 defensive ends right now with Newberg solidly in the fold. So, maybe they take 5. You know what I mean? It's a real possibility. You get Mozzie Smith, you get Hinton on the inside, you're set in the interior, and then you take 4 or 5 on the outside. So, because I look at their last cycle, I think Upshaw's a guy that's going to slide inside. I don't think he's a defensive end. I think he's a tackle. I think that leaves them with 1 or 2. Welshoff, and I'm missing somebody. I apologize to them for missing, but there's a need there. So I think they're going to take quite a few. It's just, again, the question is how many.
Well, we have 1 inside linebacker committed right now, Charles Thomas from IMG. There are 2 others we're in on big, though. Brandon Smith, he's from Mineral, Virginia, and a local kid, Marcel Lewis from Chippewa Valley in Clinton Township. Could we take 3 inside backers in this class?
I don't see 3. I see 2 for sure. Smith. I think Michigan. So that's another. Our system. I'm 95% sure Michigan's recruiting him at Sam on the outside. I mean, he's 6'5". There's no way. I really don't see Michigan wanting a 6'5" guy on the inside. That's more of the, Devin Bush, 5'11", 6 foot, like speedsters.
Yeah.
Smith's a guy on the edge. Lewis definitely more of a classic. Mike style. I know Michigan really impressed after the offer. I really get the strong impression they're kind of in wait and see mode at middle because like they'll host top 100 Shane Lee this weekend out of St. Francis Academy, which is Biff Poggi's school up in Baltimore. So I think maybe that's what guy that they'll check in, see what's going on there, kind of move on from there. I do believe they want a second Mike, though. I mean, Thomas, I would have to assume is a Mike. I don't think he has the speed, at least in a Don Brown defense, to play on the outside. So, I'd say probably 2 at the Mike. Outside wise, I think they can still just be really picky. They did so well in 17 with Ross, Singleton, Anthony, and then 18, they complement it perfectly. I mean, McGrone was the top outside linebacker prospect in the country, according to us at 24/7. So, I think they can still afford to be very picky. That's why you see them going after, the Smith type guys or a Lance Dixon at Viper, type spot. So it's going to be interesting there. But again, I think they can really, more than almost any other position on the roster, with what they did in 18 with McGrone, it's a position that they can really sit back on and go hard on the elite. Smith's the number one. He's listed, like I said, listed inside, but he's the number one outside. He'd be ranked the number one outside, I believe, too. They can go after the Smiths and focus on Lance Dixon and those guys, and then kind of go from there. It reminds me of really a lot of the way they just approached 18 in general after what they did in 16, 17, where you shoot for the moon, and then you just kind of keep your evaluations open, maybe look for a diamond in the rough type guy, because they could totally afford to take a chance at outside linebacker this cycle, in my opinion. So we'll see. Smith was a guy I feel like would really like Michigan, though. He just visited. He definitely strikes me as a Michigan Notre Dame type kid. Again, not always the case that they end up there, but I usually feel like I have a good read on those types of guys, and he definitely strikes me as a Michigan Notre Dame type kid.
So at this point, Steve, 7 hard commits. Do you expect a slew of verbals this spring and summer, or will the bulk of this class fill out in the fall?
It's a great question. It's kind of it's harder to answer that than usual because of the earlier official visit season. I think you may see more than you normally would with the elite kids. I think you'll see a lot of these elite kids take some officials, and I think you'll see some early verbals. I think, put it this way, one really interesting strategy, and it makes total sense. I know Clemson, Georgia, Miami are 3 schools I can say 100% for sure are not hosting any kids on official visits this spring. They're going to wait until the fall, which is exactly what I would do if I was them, though, because, again, we talk about, like those 3 schools, they can host a lot of those same kids that are going to be coming up to Michigan and Ohio State and maybe going up to, Nebraska or something. They can host those kids on unofficials all day long. So why not wait and then roll out the red carpet in the fall, with a packed football stadium at a big game. It's interesting. The dynamics of this cycle are really interesting in that regard. I think the early official visit stuff kind of has not everything in a flux, but I think it's just, nobody really knows for sure how it's going to play out. So to see schools aiming for officials in different points of the year, I think it makes it really interesting. But it makes sense on both sides. Like I said, Michigan would never be getting John Dunmore on a visit this weekend unless it was an official. There's just no way it would happen. So, and the weather doesn't really appear to be on Michigan's side at this point. We'll see what it's like on Saturday, but there's always that angle of it too, which doesn't necessarily play to their advantage. But so I think you're going to see maybe some guys who wouldn't normally verbal early that may do it because they may take 3 or 4 officials this spring, and at that point, with just the way things are now with reporters like bugging kids for interviews all the time, I think kids get exhausted of the process. So I think you take 5 officials this spring or even 3 or 4, I think you'll have some kids that are ready to just make a decision. So, but we'll see. Like I said, there's no real way to answer it right now, given that this will be the first time that this has happened.
Well, a couple of closing questions for you, Steve. Have you had a chance to see Amazon's All or Nothing yet? I think it's on Amazon Prime, because I haven't.
I actually haven't seen it either. Isaiah Hole watched the whole thing and wrote like a really nice review on it. If anyone's listening, I'd recommend reading it. I know his big takeaway, which was not a surprise to me, is just that these players are people and they're not robots who are designed to make fans happy or sad based on what they do on the football field. So I know that media availability, I think this week, I think even the players had mentioned, they hope that it brought a more human side, to everything. You get to know some of these guys as actual people, because given the pressure that's going to be on the team this year, it's like this documentary turned into another like lightning rod for, sorry, but idiot fans to say, they should be focusing more on football, as if, like, again, playing into that whole idea that these guys are just robots that are on campus to eat, sleep, and breathe football 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and do literally nothing else with their lives, So, and I mean, this group of like the older guys in this, like the Winovich, Spate, I mean, those are some of the first guys I covered in high school when I first started doing this. So I know these guys like really well. So the personality aspect doesn't surprise me, especially, Winovich is such a unique character. He always has been. So it's cool for people maybe that never see that side of these guys to actually get to experience that a little bit. So no, I'm probably going to put it in this week, check it out and see. I know I've heard a lot about Don Brown,
Yeah.
which again, doesn't surprise me at all though. I mean, the guy is, he's exactly as advertised, so I'm excited there. But, I actually, the one thing is, I actually think it's I'm more interested to watch it because they went 8-5. I think you'll see a whole different side, for those who have watched. I'm guessing that I'll see a whole different side of everything than you would if they went, if it was just some documentary about a 12-0, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, seeing these guys in an adverse or, not so positive situation, I think you're going to learn a lot more about how the program is run, and how, I think maybe breed a little bit more optimism for this season. It's like I was laughing because there was somebody commenting like, man, it's really great to see like Rashawn Gary, like, be so emotional after a loss. Like, that these guys want it. And it's like, you shouldn't have had to see that to know that these kids want to win more than any fan does. I mean, they're the ones that pour their blood, sweat, and tears into it, so, so I'm interested to see that side of things and get to know some of these guys on an even bigger level.
No, I'm looking forward to it too. I'll have to catch it later this week. So I'm sure we're going to be hearing a lot more about that in the coming weeks and months still. The spring game is this Saturday night under the lights. It's on BTN. I think it has BTN all to itself Saturday night. Guaranteed we will not learn much, but, as usual, nice to have football back for at least one night, Steve.
I agree. You're asked about what are you looking most forward to. For me, I just go the simple route and say I'm interested to see what Shea Patterson does. I think we all know what the defense is capable of and is going to do this year. Not saying you're not interested and excited maybe to see, maybe if a guy like Jamarick Woods has taken that next step at safety, or if the hype about, maybe we'll learn a little bit about if the hype for Michael Dwumfor is well founded at this point, but I'm definitely most interested to see what Patterson brings to the table. I mean, we've seen him play at the college level, so there's some idea out there what he can do and what he can do differently than what Michigan's had at quarterback. But I'm intrigued. I think he's going to kind of be the main event, I think, for most fans. I think most fans will also want to see maybe how this wide receiver position is developed too. There's always the offensive line, but again, I don't really think you learn a lot about the trenches in these games, especially when they split squad. It's, the five that will be playing on each side of the ball are not the five that'll be starting together unless they, rig it to get the same unit on the field. But I just, I don't think it's played out that way yet. So interesting in that regard, but yeah, definitely most interested in Patterson, most interested, Nico Collins, not Tariq Black. Tariq's going to have a good year as long as he's healthy. But Nico Collins, Oliver Martin, kind of interested to see what those guys do. We've heard some good things about Oliver Martin this spring. So those types of guys I'm really interested to see. Zach Gentry. I think Zach Gentry is a guy that could potentially be in line for a huge year. Much like Peoples-Jones, I think Gentry's numbers would have been a lot better if he'd had adequate quarterback play to get him the ball throughout the year last year. So given that we should have that in 2018, I think it'll be interesting to see maybe how he looks. But yeah, by and large, it's just another practice is really all it is. Just give the fans a chance to see these guys in their jerseys and see some new names. I don't anticipate. Well, I guess maybe we'll see Joe Milton. I mean, it's just a practice, so maybe he'll get out there and get to throw a little bit. So maybe they'll drop him back and let him throw it 80 yards or whatever he can do. I mean, maybe that's part of it too, is to see him. I guess I kind of forgot about that, but given that there's next to no chance that he'll be a factor this year, I think Patterson and what he does, I think, is definitely most interesting to me.
With us on our game day segment this week has been Steve Lorenz from 24/7 Sports. And as you can tell, as always, there is a lot going on in the recruiting scene. So next month in May, we'll get you back, Steve, and who knows what will have happened by then. But as always, my listeners eat this up, and we look forward to the next visit.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Appreciate it.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, the spring game is set for a 5:45 p.m. start, so some of the game will be under the lights. Let's hope the weather forecast changes between now and Saturday. As all of us in Michigan know, it can. As of this morning, the forecast is for thunderstorms and temps in the mid-50s. A 90% chance of rain during the game. So bundle up. If you're not heading to the big house, you can watch the game in your dry living room, in your lazy boy, on BTN. The number 17 ranked University of Michigan softball team completed the weekend series sweep at Penn State with an 11-1 5-inning decision on Sunday at the Nittany Lions Beard Field. The Wolverines have won 7 straight games and 26 of their last 27. Michigan put up 6 runs in the second inning and 4 in the third to break open the game and cruise to its second run rule decision in 3 games. Junior second baseman Faith Canfield, who saw her 17-game hit streak halted the day before, began anew with a 2-hit, 4 RBI effort at the top of the lineup. Senior first baseman Tara Blanco also posted 2 hits and 2 RBIs. In all, 6 different Wolverines tallied base hits in the series finale. Freshman left-handed pitcher Megan Bobian, now 23-2, secured her 3rd win of the weekend, 7th in as many Michigan games, with a 1-hit, 5-strikeout effort through 3 innings. It was freshman right-hander Sarah Schaefer who allowed the Penn State run. Schaefer retired the next 6 batters she faced with 1 strikeout to close out the contest. It's going to be another weather-permitting week. We're recording on Tuesday morning, and this afternoon is supposed to be a makeup game with EMU. Weather looks good for that. Then Wednesday, a single game with Sparty, and that looks to be the best weather day of the week. Rutgers is in town for a 3-game set this weekend with a lot of rain in the forecast. Then next Tuesday, it's off to East Lansing for another game with MSU. Michigan is 31-7 overall, 7-1 in Big Ten play. A 9th-inning rally extended the University of Michigan baseball team's win streak to 15 games on Sunday, as the Wolverines defeated the Northwestern Wildcats 7-3 to clinch its 4th consecutive series sweep in the weekend finale at Miller Park. The 15 consecutive wins mark a new record under head coach Eric Bakich. The next longest win streak by a Wolverine team came in 2008, when Michigan won 16 straight. We are 19-11 overall and a perfect 6-0 in Big Ten play. Maryland will be in town for a 3-game series this weekend. On Friday or Saturday, I'll publish this month's Michigan Man Extra. I'll give you a heads up on Facebook or Twitter when it goes live. My guest will be former Michigan standout Mario Ojemudia. We'll find out what he's up to now, talk about his Michigan career and his NFL career that was cut short by injury, and get his thoughts, of course, on what's happening with our current Wolverines. That will do it for another edition of The Michigan Man. Thanks for joining me, and make sure you tell your friends and family about the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. Until we meet again, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!